Hello, and welcome to the launch of the IEA's new report, The Future of Heat Pumps. I'm Daniel Wetzel, one of the authors on the report. And for today's event, I'm joined here today in Brussels by the IEA Executive Director, Fatih Birol, and the IEA Chief Modeler, Laura Coetzee. We're joined today as well by special guests, Dita Juul Jorgensen, the European Commission Director General for Energy, and Erik Lindqvist, the CEO of NIBE, one of Europe's largest heat pump manufacturers. Dr. Birol will make some opening remarks, and then Ms. Coetzee will present the key findings of the report. Then we will have DG Jorgensen provide a perspective from policymakers, and then after that, Mr. Lindqvist will provide an industry perspective. After that, we will take questions from journalists. So, for the journalists taking part in the press webinar, we invite you to submit questions via the Q&A function in the Zoom. You can do this at any point during the presentation. After that, we will take a 2-minute break to gather your questions and be able to respond to them and delegate them across the panel. So with that, I'll hand you over to our Executive Director, Dr. Birol, for opening remarks. Thank you.
So many thanks, Mr. Wetzel. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, greetings from Brussels, as they say, the capital of Europe. It's a great pleasure today to launch our report on heat pumps. When we look at the global energy markets, how energy is consumed, we see that our homes, our offices, our schools, businesses are relying on fossil fuels big time for heating. Natural gas, the fuel which is at the center of the current energy debates, alone provides 40% of global heating needs. Now, of course, in such a combination, the households, businesses are vulnerable to the price volatility, high, as we experience now, high gas bills. At the same time, they do emit, by using fossil fuels for heating, significant amount of greenhouse gases. Now, when we look at the policymakers, the governments around the world, they are very keen in most parts of the world to push clean energy options. But up to now, there was a heavy concentration of decarbonization, cleaning of electricity generation, pushing the renewable options, and in some countries, nuclear power. And as well as power generation, a strong emphasis was on the transportation sector, namely providing incentives for electric cars. And again, we see a strong increase there. Now, we thought at the International Energy Agency, it is the time to look at the heat pumps as an important solution to both our energy security and at the same time climate challenges. And we are seeing both the momentum and the urgency in this context. So normally, I should share you with some internal IEA information. Normally, heat pump, this report was one of the chapters in our seminal publication, World Energy Outlook 2022, but discussing with our Chief Energy Modeler, Laura Coetzee, I told Laura, it is such an important topic that it might be lost in the middle of so many important findings of the World Energy Outlook. Let's make a special report on that. And the interest we have received from the industry, from governments, from regulators, and from the consumers prove that IEA was right to release it in as a special report, trying to get special attention to this very subject. Now, as we see in the renewable solar, wind, and electric cars, also for heat pumps, we are seeing unprecedented momentum. Huge. Years and years, the governments, industry, and the others push the heat pumps, mainly driven by climate, environmental concerns. But now, the energy security is a key driver of heat pumps around the world, and especially in Europe. Our numbers show that the last year, 2021, the sales of heat pumps increased by an important 15%. And the biggest part of the increase came from Europe. And when we look at the first half of this year, we expect, the numbers show, in fact, that another doubling of the installations we have seen last year. What is driving this? Government policies, by seeing the heat pumps excellent benefits in terms of the reducing the gas consumption. For many households and businesses, reducing the bills, the energy bills at home or at their businesses, and also, of course, the climate change benefits. So it is, of course, not only in Europe, across the world, we see this, again, a big momentum. And when we talk with several manufacturers around the world, we see a rather strong, to use that word, strong competition, which we, as International Energy Agency, happy to see, happy to witness. Because this healthy competition may well end up more efficiency to the markets. Our numbers show that in our report, the acceleration of the heat pump deployment can bring lots of benefits to gas security, reducing of emissions, and reducing of the import bills. I picked up one number from the excellent report that my colleagues Lara Kozzi and Dan Wetzel and the entire team put together. It says by 2025, which means almost tomorrow, we can save, if we go with this pace that we are talking about, we can save natural gas about 7 BCM, 2025. Again, it means tomorrow, which is equivalent to the gas we get from Trans-Adriatic pipeline. So a major, major boost for the European gas security. So, dear friends, dear colleagues, I would like to finish by saying the governments, we will be talking with several European, North American, Asian governments in the next few days and weeks about this topic. We are going to ask basically 3 things to governments. One, please continue to support the first investment for the especially medium and low-income household and businesses, because in many cases the upfront cost may be a significant hurdle. So this is number one that we are going to say, and there are some examples in some countries we see very successful, very smart way of supporting the households and businesses to reduce the hurdle of upfront costs. The second point I would like to mention is as important as providing an incentive for heat pumps. We should, in my view, provide a disincentive for the heating systems which are, on one hand, increasing the reliance on fossil fuels, and as such, increasing the emissions. It should go both ways. And the third one is, as a result of heat pumps, in some cases, in some countries, the electricity markets may well have some challenges. So therefore, the governments should take note of the penetration of heat pumps, what kind of implications they may or they may not have on the electricity security. So, dear colleagues, this is the what I see since many years. I am sure our colleague Mr. Lindqvist will talk about the heat pumps and it is history. But as far as I can see, heat pump is seeing a major takeoff now. It's a very important moment for heat pump industry and for the governments in Europe, in North America, Asia, and beyond. And I hope that this report, which is the first report focusing on heat pumps at a global level, providing concrete recommendations on the governments based on real data, will be helpful. I would like to thank here the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, for their support. We have organized a huge meeting at the IEA, a workshop of 120 manufacturers and the thought leaders around the world for that. Again, I would like to thank the European Commission. We have the honor of having the Director General, Mrs. Jorgensen, with us here for all the support and input we got from them. And finally, I would like to thank Mr. Lindqvist, the CEO of NIBE, for being with us here today. So thank you very much, and back to you, Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burwell. Next, we'll have Ms. Lara Kutzi, our Chief Modeler at the IEA, speaking about the key results of the report and taking you through a presentation of the key findings there. So without further ado, I'll hand it back over to Ms. Kutzi.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's my great pleasure to take you through some of the key findings of the report we just released this morning. For all of you interested in the topic, consumers, policymakers, manufacturers, you can find this online. We want to make this resource available to everyone. So without further ado, maybe something we didn't ask ourselves very much before the global energy crisis hit us at the beginning of this year. In which way do we heat our homes, our schools, our offices? Actually, globally, most of the production of heat is coming from fossil fuels. More than half of our buildings in the world are heated using fossil fuels, mostly with natural gas. Heat pumps are taking only 10% of the global heat productions in buildings. Other sustainable solutions that have larger shares include, for example, district heating at around 15%, a very important area that is growing also very fast. However, what we have been noticing since the past couple of years is really an increasing, very large momentum in the sales of heat pump. In 2021, globally, we sold amount of heat pump that grew at 13%. We have never seen this number before. To give you an order of magnitude, this is twice as much what we have sold on average over the past decade. As you can see here, many European countries leading with incredible numbers, Poland, Italy at 60% of sales. On average, the European Union really growing very, very strongly at 35%, and this was last year. The data that we're seeing coming in for the beginning of this year, very similar, very, very strong growth expected for this year as well. As Dr. Birol mentioned, clearly energy security concerned, affordability concerns in the minds of all consumers, pushing the sales at new high levels. So what is our expectation now globally for this market of a clean energy technology for the heating sector? So if you look to 2030, our expectation is the tripling globally of the sales that we are seeing in 2021. And this is really happening at the global scale for every places that are looking at more sustainable heating solutions. China, very much leading there. As you can see, by 2030, China by itself will be larger than the sales we are seeing today. But second there is Europe, very close to North America, taking a quarter each of the sales. As we are today as Dr. Bilal mentioned, in Brussels with the European Commission, but also hosted very kindly by the European Heat Pump Association, which we kindly thank. Let's zoom into Europe in a second. So record sales in 2021, 2 million new heat pumps sold. Our expectation is this could double by 2025 to 4 million and even grow stronger at around 7 million units by 2030. In many cases, we see this happening together with the building renovation wave. Why? Because this makes the heat pump needs smaller. You buy a smaller appliance, it will make your energy bills even more convenient. Of course, why is for the EU even more important? Today, natural gas use in buildings for heating is the largest consumer of natural gas in Europe. So tackling the heating habits of Europeans is the all more urgent. We've seen the global numbers just a second ago, 10% of global heating needs met via heat pumps. In Europe, we are slightly behind on average, only 8%. And with this type of development that we are expecting over the past several years, we are actually catching up, and by 2030, we would be actually doubling, even more than doubling, the share of heat supplied by heat pumps, really reaching nearly 20%, and to give an order of magnitude, this level is what the United States has already today. What are the implications of this type of deployment for security? They are very, very important. Dr. Birol mentioned them earlier. Already in 3 years, you would have amount of savings that are similar to some of the major pipeline suppliers to Europe, the Trans-Adriatic pipeline. By 2030, we would be talking at least 21 BCM. This, to put in the context, is 15% of what Europe was importing from Russia just a year ago. And this, why do we say at least, is because we also see potential beyond buildings for industrial heat pumps in particular, for low temperature heat in the food industry, in the paper industry, in the chemical industry. Over 3,000 facilities in Europe today could, with not major changes, switch to heat pumps. And if this has the right policy setting around it, we could increase savings by another 12 BCM. Now, let's look at what are the barriers and the current policy setting. First of all, the policy setting and the momentum around heat pumps have never been larger than today. So we are monitoring over 30 countries that account for 70% of global heat demand, have policies in place to accelerate heat pump deployment. This is huge. And what type of incentives do we see? There are incentives that help consumers lower the upfront cost. Why is that needed? As you can see here, we are showing across several geographies from Asia to North America to Europe how the cost of heating your home compares over the lifetime of your either natural gas boiler or your heat pump. And what you see there is that we are today at par. So overall, you are paying the same if you have a gas boiler or a heat pump. However, today, for some technologies, the upfront cost of a heat pump can be 2 times to 4 times larger. This means that consumers will face this higher cost, and this is where we see the policy needing particular attention. Dr. Birol mentioned this earlier, especially lower income households are the ones that for us should really be targeted first. Another type of what you can see it in a double way is an opportunity on one hand, but is if you have tried like me to install your heat pump at home now, can be a challenge. You see this tripling of sales requiring many more jobs. Here you see the numbers is millions of new jobs, especially in the installation part of the heat pumps. But today finding installers is challenging. So this is one area that requires attention, both from companies but also from policymakers, in particular retraining existing skills for heat installers in general, but also electricians, plumbers that could be retrained to actually fill the shortage of labor that we are currently seeing in these specific sectors. And finally, we have been discussing what does it make this huge heat pump deployment for global energy trends. First of all, it creates an increase, of course, in electricity demand. In our assessment, this is well managed and very manageable if there are two conditions that need to take place. First of all, push the heat pump deployment together with the energy efficiency in buildings. This reduces the peak demand for electricity and enables a secure transition towards a more electricity-driven sector, together with careful grid planning. The benefits there are huge. As you can see very clearly here, you can see that the switch to heat pumps has a very positive energy balance. You reduce the overall energy consumption because heat pumps are much more efficient than the conventional fossil fuel boilers. Couple of overall numbers here. In very tight energy markets as we are living today, the savings that we are seeing both in oil, 1 million barrels a day by 2030 is very significant, could bring relief to markets, and at the same time for global natural gas markets as well, savings of 80 BCM. Let's just conclude with savings in terms of environmental considerations. As you can see there are places in the world, in Europe, in China, where some of the heating is still done through coal. The moment this coal is taken out of the system, there are immediate health benefit and local pollutant benefits that are significant. But the largest important environmental benefits are on CO2. Our assessment is that this type of tripling that we're talking about in terms of sales by 2030 could actually decrease emissions by 2030 by 500 million tons. This would be equivalent to the emissions that Canada has today, or for European audience is like taking away all the cars from the roads in Europe today. So very, very significant savings. Let me conclude with a final word in terms of the feasibility of this scaling up. The scaling up that we're seeing, this tripling that we're talking about on sales and on overall heat pump installed would be significant, but not as large as the scale up of other clean energy technology as seen in the past. Would be lower than what we have seen, for example, for solar PV or even for electric vehicles, and we consider this completely in the realm of the feasibility and the feasible, achievable with this decade if the right policy settings is put in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cozzi, for the presentation there. I'd like to remind journalists, if you can put any questions in the Q&A, we'll make sure we start getting those prepared for the Q&A section, so that would be great. I would like to now turn it over to the European Commission Director General for Energy, Dita Juul-Jochemsen. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much, first of all, to the International Energy Agency, to Fatih Birol, Laura Cozzi for this excellent report. It comes very timely because heat pumps are essential both for achieving our climate objectives as part of the European Green Deal, but also essential as one of the responses to the current energy crisis for energy security, affordability, and sustainable energy across the European Union. What we see in the European Union reflects largely what has been described as the global situation, which is that fossil fuels account for a very high share of our heating, about 70% across all sectors in the European Union. So there's a lot that can be done there, and heat pumps are a critical part of a strategy, again, responding both to the energy crisis, the Russian war in Ukraine, but responding also to the climate crisis and the necessary decarbonization of our energy system and of our economies. So what are we doing within the European Union in relation to heat pumps and to help facilitate this change and accelerate the scaling up of heat pumps as part of our heating systems? Now, first of all, at European level, in the European Union, what we're doing is we're aligning all of our policies, all of our regulatory frameworks to make sure that we facilitate as much as possible the rollout of heat pumps and that we remove any obstacles that may be there in the markets. And the IEA has helpfully pointed to some obstacles that need to be addressed. Concretely, that is in our Energy Efficiency Directive, in our Directive on the Energy Performance of Buildings, in our Renewable Energy Directive, but also through eco-design. So one of the measures that we are working on as part of eco-design is a phasing out of standalone boilers by 2029. This is part of our Repower EU. Repower EU is our strategy towards reducing our dependence on Russian fossil fuels and gas in particular. So heat pumps have a special place also as part of Repowering EU to reduce our consumption and to rely more on renewables in the energy system that is more independent and more resilient. One of the other aspects we've been doing, just as a concrete example, is that we have suggested an accelerating permitting process for geothermal heat pumps. That was agreed among European energy ministers just last week. So we are hoping for a swift adoption of that so that we can see faster permitting also for heat pumps, again, as an emergency measure to respond to the current energy crisis as swiftly as possible across the European Union. In addition to what we do at the level of the European Union, member states nationally, of course, also take actions to facilitate the heat pumps. There are subsidies in place in a number of member states, really to incentivize the investment into heat pumps also at local level. And then there are some countries that nationally have decided to ban the use of fossil fuels for new and existing buildings. So another example of concrete regulatory measures, concrete initiatives, both at European and national levels, that can help accelerate heat pumps. We believe that more needs to be done, and in that context, the IEA report and analysis are extremely helpful to identify any obstacles, but we need to do more to increase the sale of heat pumps across the European Union. We have seen significant growth last year and this year, and we expect that trend to continue with the energy crisis. We need more growth. And so we are looking at initiatives to support the heat pump sector together with our colleagues responsible for European industrial policy and European growth measures. As I said, we help to address any barriers that may be there, including in the area of skills. It's the European Year of Skills coming up, and that will be there will be important measures there. And then we're looking at what are the necessary measures to support industry to bring this forward and to ensure competitiveness here. And then finally, as part of Repower EU, as I mentioned, heat pumps are central, and we will continue our work to identify the need for possible further measures, helped by this very useful report from the International Energy Agency. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks, DG Jorgensen. Next, we will have the CEO of NIBA, Mr. Lindqvist, give remarks from an industry perspective. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much for having me here. It's almost overwhelming. It's such a, should I say, praising to the heat pump industry. You know, I'm here on behalf of the whole industry, heat pump industry in the world, and just to hear all these comforting words is something we've been waiting for years, of course. And personally, I've spent 35 years in this industry, waiting for this particular moment. So it's with pride, but of course coupled with modesty as well, that we now are going to take on this challenge. And you can just rest assured that we're going to take on this challenge very seriously. We've been perhaps trying to preach our message as an industry for too many years, being alone. Now we have your support. And this report, I mean, it's difficult to comprehend how important that is for us to be linked to decarbonization and heating and cooling, and also to be linked to saving energy and energy safety. That's something that's very difficult to copy. Those creatures, heat pumps as we call them, they have such a potential in the whole world. And not only in residential heating, but also in industry and in district heating. There are no limitations really. And the industry is ready. Of course there are challenges. I mean, I'm sure people talk about, oh, what about natural refrigerants? Oh, will there be enough of trained people? Will there be enough of resources on the educational level? You know, the water going to find its way down the mountain, as it always does. And when it's so clearly pronounced from authorities, we are very certain that we're going to fulfill our duties from this industry. And it's a pleasure to take on this challenge. It's beyond, the real, should I say, business concept of selling and having a decent profit and loss statement. This is something else. This is adding something to society, something to remember. The world finally took a big leap towards something different, to a betterment for the whole world. And of course, we need certainty when it comes to political statements and stability. Needless to say, this has to have a longevity performance onwards from now. And there has to be also pricing and taxation levels that sort of favor these heat pump products that we talk about, because it has not been in the past. I'm not being too critical, I hope, in saying that. But as long as those factors are fulfilled, we are fully confident that we're going to do our part, and I'm talking of the whole heat pump industry in the world. We're going to take on this challenge very positively. Thank you for allowing this, and thank you for being so positive in your report.
Many thanks for those remarks. So we'll take a 2-minute break to look at press questions. Please put any other questions in the Zoom chat function right now, and we'll be back with you in 2 minutes. Thank you very much. Hi, we're back. Thank you for your questions. We will try and cover as much as possible. We only have a short period of time. The first question will be for Ms. Jorgensen. A question on, are EU member states really doing enough to support the Commission's target for installing 30 million additional heat pumps by 2030? And how quickly can this ramp up given the urgency in the energy crisis? Over to you.
Thank you very much. As the report has also established, a lot has happened within the European Union over the last years. Some member states more than others. So the first point I would make is it of course depends to some extent on national circumstances and what is feasible. Secondly, member states are acting. They're acting within the European regulatory context, our common efforts, Repower EU, and the different regulations we have in place and measures we have in place to accelerate the rollout of heat pumps. Just to give a couple of examples, following the COVID crisis, we put in place recovery and resilience facility across the European Union to help the recovery, but to make sure that we recover in a green way that aligns with our climate objectives. So a very significant share of the investments under the recovery and resilience facility across the European Union will go to green investments, and heat pumps is an obvious candidate for that. And we see that reflected in a number of national recovery and resilience plans. So that is one example. There are other examples that are regulatory in nature. So we've European common regulatory frameworks, but member states can decide to go further. Some member states are banning fossil fuel heating, standalone fossil heaters. Member states are taking different measures also at regulatory level, in addition to what we do together in Europe, including in eco-design. As I mentioned, there are quite significant national differences based on national circumstances, national cultures in relation to how do you heat your homes and how do you best integrate heat pumps into that. I think one interesting aspect of that is there's sometimes an understanding that heat pumps only work if it is not too cold or if your house is not too old. And actually what we can see and what's happening is that in Scandinavian countries, in Northern European countries, there's been a significant uptake of heat pumps in housing. And so in other words, this works also in a cold climate. We also see that heat pumps are being installed in older buildings and older homes. And again, we see that works very well. One specific example on that are geothermal heat pumps that also work in bigger cities where there can otherwise be challenges. So we have made a proposal to accelerate permitting for geothermal heat pump installation that is supported by member states. And so we hope that can go forward really as part of the emergency measures to address the current energy crisis.
Perfect. Thank you very much. The next question, I believe, will be for Ms. Kotze. And we'll combine two questions here. This first one is coming to us from Japan. There was a discussion around what incentives are favoring potentially fossil fuel boilers today. What are the incentives that need to be rebalanced? And what kind of concrete barriers do you see affecting consumer uptake and also industrial uptake? And in particular, how do we overcome this high initial investment need? So, Ms. Kotze, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. So what we have analyzed is very clearly from the policy perspective, three priorities. The first is about taxation. In some countries, there is still taxation that may favor fossil fuels vis-a-vis electricity, and this is clearly the first thing that needs to be tackled to have a level playing field and then a larger uptake of heat pump. The second we mentioned already earlier, in some cases still, even with subsidies, if subsidies are not in place, the higher upfront cost really is creating a terrible hurdle for consumers today that are already facing very high energy bills. So this is where the really subsidies and the policy framework comes and help. And the third was mentioned both by the Director General and the Executive Director is really the incumbent, so the current fossil fuel mix. So in Europe, we have analyzed actually that the fossil fuel bans in place would create space for around 10 million heat pump sales over the period that we have analyzed. So compared to the 30 million that we have heard earlier, clearly extending these bans would create even more space and accelerate further the deployment of heat pumps. So in synthesis, those three key policy priority: getting the taxation right, getting the subsidies for the upfront cost, and the disincentive right. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ms. Coetzee. The next one will be for Mr. Lindquist. This one is on competitive dynamics. This is in from Alex Blackburn from S&P Global. The idea is, how do we assess competitive dynamics in the heat pump space right now? Do you see the rollout being led by specialists like NEBA or by utilities or by other sorts of players? And which players do you think can move the needle the most on this? Additionally, there's one other question around the role of labor and labor shortages, and is there something that manufacturers are doing to help address this as well? So over to you, Mr. Lindquist.
Well, that was a comprehensive question. Right. I'll tell you. I think that we all influence the market, in our ways. I don't think that any particular one would be able to influence the market. But I think the combination of influence, that's the whole idea. And now we see today, and we listen today, for the first time, that companies and authorities and energy experts, they are really engaged in this. So I think that is the driving force, that this is not like one body's exercise. The whole society has to work in the right direction. And if I understood the question correctly there as far as our, should I say, capability of meeting the demand, I can't speak of every heat pump manufacturer in the world, but every manufacturer has excess capacity ready to expand. So the enormous investments we're seeing now, they are more to cater for the coming 24, 25, 26, and then there's going to be another round of investments. I don't foresee any shortages on the manufacturing side. Of course, supply chain might be one issue, but we also see that also being cured gradually. I don't know whether there was a comprehensive answer to a comprehensive question, but I tried.
That's perfect. So we have 2 minutes left, so the last question I wanted to hand over to Dr. Barol, a little bit on a different topic, but the question is, we saw your interview in The Guardian today about 1.5 degrees C target. The question is, so is there still hope? Dr. Barol, if you want to take that, and we can close it out here.
Thank you very much. It is a bit different, but not completely different, of course. Yes, what I said, and I want to reiterate here, that some scientists and the stubborn defenders of the existing energy system more or less at the same time declare that the 1.5 degrees target is dead. And I believe that this claim is factually a poor one, and at the same time it is politically irresponsible. Factually, just give you one number, and this is our World Energy Outlook is full with numbers on this. We see that as a result of Repower EU, Director General Jorgensen mentioned in Europe, Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, Japan, China, India, accelerating their clean energy investments at a pace that we have never seen. And as a result, even within the current policy context in 2030, compared to last year, we see clean energy investment increasing by 50%. And I think momentum is there. It will increase more and will help to reduce the emissions and hopefully seeing a decline. From that point of view, without looking at the numbers very carefully, in the energy sector, the main sector responsible for the emissions, in my view, is a dogmatic approach and is not based on the real-time data. And factually, it is politically it is irresponsible, because if you put 1.5, as some scientists and some, as I said, the stubborn defenders of some current energy system, some countries do, as they claim, if 1.5 is dead, if we claim that, I think even the other our climate cause, 1.7 for example, or 1.8 or 1.6, they will be also at a risk. So I believe it is also politically irresponsible to announce that a 1.5-degree target is that, and World Energy Outlook shows that it is becoming increasingly difficult, yes, but we think it is still feasible. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much to all of our participants today, and thank you for all of you joining online. With that, I'd like to close this webinar, and thank you again for joining the launch of our report, The Future of Heat Pumps. Have a good day.